Welcome to Writers Blockbusters, the show where we treat the final edit of the movie like the script. I'm one of the hosts, Bob Rose, at Thundergrunt Bob on all the dumb social medias. And right now, Jimmy's going to introduce himself.
I am Jimmy George. I am a screenwriter and script consultant, and my Twitter handle is at Jimmy R. George.
And Jamie?
And I am Jamie Nash. I am the writer of Save the Cat Writes for TV and the Save the Cat Beat Sheet Workbook. I'm also a screenwriter, and my Twitter handle is Jamie_Nash.
Nice. And today we're going to talk about Dune Part 2. Not 1. We're going to talk about Dune Part 2. Before we get into our discussion topics, we're going to go around and we're going to say like our own personal opinion or whatever we want to say about this movie before we get to our script stuff. Let's start with Jamie.
Yeah, I don't have a huge amount of personal experience with this. I'll go back to the book. When I was a kid, I was a big Dungeons and Dragons guy, and I loved like sci-fi books were my favorite books. And I read this book way back when, before I saw the David Lynch movie and stuff like that. And I remember really enjoying the book. I was kind of in the headspace of that kind of world building, fascinated by the world building aspects of it more than the story itself. But thought it had a lot of intriguing ideas. And still to this day, I'm impressed by like all the ideas. In some ways, it's one of my favorite world building things, even though I didn't go on to read all the other books. It wasn't like it inspired me that much. But, around the time I read The Lord of the Rings and things like that, I probably was reading the Dragonlance books from the Dungeons and Dragons people and stuff like that. I read Dune and really enjoyed it. That's like my history with Dune. So coming to this, I can't say like I was like, I can't wait to see Dune. I watched the first one during the pandemic, and I honestly my feelings with the movie and this movie are similar, where I kind of I liked it. I liked it, but liked it for different reasons, like weird reasons. Like I like the world building. I kind of like half paying attention to it. Like kind of I almost go into it like I'm not going to understand all this. It's too complicated. So I'm just going to take it for what it is and let it kind of gloss over me and not worry so much about like all the world building and stuff like that. And I kind of enjoy it that way. I tend to watch these movies in parts because I'm streaming them. I didn't see it at the theater. And I tend to watch it like a TV show. Like I watch 40 minutes, I'll turn it off. I'll come back, watch another 40 minutes, turn it off, something like that. So anyway, that's that's about all I got for Dune. Nothing that interesting.
We'll touch on that a little later. On that last point you made. Jimmy.
Yeah, so never read the book. I'm a children of the 80s, so I'm a child of the 80s, so I absolutely saw the David Lynch Dune, and I remember it vividly. And I liked it then. I didn't revisit it before this because I kind of wanted to go in cold. Yeah, I do not like this movie. I have strong, not favorable opinions about this movie, and I kind of just wanted to put it out there that like I understand that there's a whole ton of people that love this movie, and anything I say is not trying to take away from that. My teenage nephew loves these movies and was like, Uncle Jimmy, this is like my Star Wars. So like I respect that and understand that there's a whole huge global audience that is like loves this and doesn't need the arc plot ingredients to enjoy it. Personally, I think it does have vibes. It does have it looks great. It sounds great. The performances are great. The vibes are great. Sand vibes. If you love sand vibes, this is your movie. Man, it's got all the sand vibes you could ever want. I don't care about sand vibes at all. They literally do nothing for me except confuse me. Who's fighting who? I don't know what I'm looking at often on screen. It looks cool, but I don't really know what's happening. Yeah, this is not for anyone. This is the first time you're listening to this show. We are not a review podcast. This is our section where we sort of give context to the rest of our comments, each of us. And so, like, from a review standpoint, I didn't like it, but this is an educational podcast first. And the reason that I think it's important for me, my side of this, to be honest, is like when a movie like this comes out and does well, it emboldens new writers to follow the lead of this by example and feel possibly like they can do a million warring factions and these gigantic world windows that without much explanation and sell their script. And that's just not the case. And so that's kind of like why I'm going to say what I'm going to say for the rest of this podcast. So, yeah.
Now, you know what, Jimmy, what you just said too, you kind of preface why we do the opening thing we do. We had someone recently criticize us for the opening of the podcast that we do. But the reason is we're giving everyone that's going to listen to our talking points a basis for where we're coming from. Because without that, I feel like it's just cold.
Yeah, the first half of our show, like the history of the show, we didn't do this, and
we didn't do it.
People started misunderstanding our feelings about the movie.
Yeah. Like if we really critical, it sounds like we hate something that we actually all loved, maybe, and it's like you need to know where we're coming from.
I actually, my process of analyzing a movie is to watch it, feel what I feel, and then analyze what I feel. Like I think a lot of people think, because I'm a save the cat guy, they think, oh, he doesn't like it because he's just going through this save the cat checklist. But that I don't do that at all. Like this movie really doesn't hit the beats and stuff like that. I go through it and I'm like, why am I bored? And then I start asking questions like, or why am I excited? Why is this one grabbing my attention? And I think it's important to kind of have that context before you start, because usually I start with, how did I feel? Why was I feeling this way? And then it's a post-mortem on why I felt that way and maybe some of the cooler things it did.
Pretty much same.
Yep.
That's a great way to describe it.
I mean, how many times on the show have I said like the reasons I like stuff is not the stuff we're talking about? A lot of like we can talk about script stuff all the time, but I'm not watching movies for my pleasure like this. God. It's terrible. To my answer, I actually wanted to say it's not that dissimilar to what Jimmy just said. I actually wrote something to these guys like this morning, or I can't remember when I wrote it, but I was like, you know what? I'm just going to read that because it kind of encapsulates how I feel. I think I'm left cold by all of Villeneuve. I said his name wrong. Denis movies leave me cold unless they are about Earth at the present time. I like Enemy, I like Prisoners, but when he's doing sci-fi, there's something about it that it's beautifully made. I can't criticize the art of it, but it's not for me, right? And so that's kind of what I said to you guys earlier. I said I love several sci-fi movies that are ethereal and confusing as this, but it doesn't win me over with the other stuff because it's just sand and everything looks like sand and everything is so ungodly serious. There's no levity in the movie, right? I was always a fan of David Lynch's Dune, but his Dune is like a wild looking 80s music video. That movie has the aesthetic and the better music and the weirder costumes and the crazier VFX. That's why I love David Lynch's Dune, right? Like that's what keeps me going. The colors and the weirdness of it. This to me
definitely levity in that.
Yeah,
too.
There's levity in that, and the execution of this, while it's amazing, and I can see it, like your nephew is like, oh, it's so cold and perfect to me. I'm like bored. So the execution bores me, and Dune isn't exactly the easiest thing to warm up to. I've read the book in the 90s. I loved it then. I love David Lynch's movie, but if you take out, I don't know, if it's such a cold adaptation, it has nothing for me. To be honest, I'm the one who stopped us from doing this earlier. These guys will vouch for me. I basically said, please don't do this. Like, I didn't want to watch this movie again so bad. I didn't want to sit through it again.
Sorry, Bob.
No, it's fine. This was excruciating to watch. Maybe the most excruciating rewatch of my year. we're watching anything. I could like I was literally I said to my TV, please end. Like please end. I was like begging for this shit to end. I don't know why. I have no reason to dislike it so much. But it's not, but also like Jimmy said, I'm not discounting people love it, and I'm not discounting that it might be great. It's not for me. My feelings on it, as to go back to Jamie, it's just like I don't know, it doesn't gel with me, man. But I will say this: the one thing I wanted to say before we get into the talking points was something I learned about Dune that I don't think I either forgot the context of it or I forgot in general, because I've never really put under a microscope until the last 2 days. You know, I haven't really thought about Dune critically, but in the research, I found out what Frank Herbert, how he views Dune a little bit. And the two quotes that I wanted to read were about Paul Atreides and how he viewed what Dune is actually about, which I kind of didn't know. I've never read past the first book. And the first quote is, "The difference between a hero and an anti-hero is where you stop the story." And the other quote is, "No more terrible disaster could befall your people than for them to fall into the hands of a hero." And these two quotes are from something where I was reading about how Frank Herbert actually views the entire thing as against Paul Atreides. Him becoming powerful and everything is an actual disaster. And what we see, the lead up to it, is actually a warning not to put all your eggs in that basket of a hero. I didn't actually know that that was his intended framing with Dune. I've never read past the first book. They obviously never adapted movies, and I never saw the TV show that goes past it and stuff. But his intention was to say, like, this is a bad thing. Is I didn't know that. That's interesting to me, and that's something that I didn't realize watching these movies and stuff.
And so when he drinks the water in this one, the blue Gatorade stuff, that's a heel turn. That's like his moment of descent in some ways, because he's going to bring about the apocalypse at that point. You know,
I guess my point is, I didn't know Frank Herbert viewed it like that. I thought, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't ever heard it from him. So, you know, and now I think that makes it read differently for me. And I think that might actually affect some of our talking points a little bit about when it comes to Paul. But yeah, so that's something I learned in doing this that I'm kind of makes me a little more interested in Dune. I wish I read that before watching it.
My yes and to that would be, I wish that was clear in the movie.
I think
this is Frank Herbert saying it.
Yeah, and I think it's something that more plays out in the series than
it plays out later.
Story.
That's what I'm saying is with the stuff that I was reading where I got that was people talking about Children of Dune and where all this goes. But the first part is like this warning about worshiping heroes and having like saviors. And I was like, I never knew it was framed like that. I never knew that he viewed it like that. That changes Dune completely. It's not like a Luke Skywalker story anymore.
Yeah.
Right? It's totally different. You know,
I mean, like Luke Skywalker, who does eventually go to the dark side story. That's kind of what it's like.
Right. No, right. It also makes, what's his name? The Kilgore, is that his name? He's the Morpheus of this movie, right? Stilgar, or whatever it is. He's the Morpheus of this movie who believes, right?
Yeah.
And it also makes it, because Morpheus believed, and Morpheus was right. Morpheus was right. And I was like, wait a minute, this makes this guy completely wrong. And the way that Frank Herbert viewed him was probably like as a fool.
Yeah.
And I was like, that frames everything so differently to me.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So yeah, I don't know what it says about Denis movies, but that's what I learned. And I wanted to say it before we did this episode because I didn't know if you guys knew that.
Definitely did not.
Okay. That's something interesting. Learn something new. There you go. That's it. Well, who wrote this shit? We just said his name 400 times. So
yeah, it's one of those names I always pronounce wrong. You know, if I would call him Denis Villeneuve or something like that.
Apologize for that too. I did it too.
Denny V, man.
Denny V.
Denny V. We'll call him Denny V. DV.
And
DV.
The interesting thing about him, he really hasn't written a ton of his scripts. He is a director of, you know, things like Arrival and Sicario and Blade Runner 2049, but he actually didn't write a lot of those. It's like the things he actually wrote were before those things. He has several movies that he wrote before those, and this one he wrote with Jonathan Spates. And Jonathan Spates' career to me is interesting. I want to talk about that for 1 second. Let me click on him in IMDb, because I first heard of Jonathan Spates from a little script called Passengers, which became a movie. And that script, when I read it, it was a Blacklist script. I loved it. It was like one of my favorite scripts just because it felt like a good spec script. And I don't know if you remember that one. That was the one where the pod breaks and the one person wakes up on the spaceship and there's...
Is it Chris Pratt?
Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence. But the screenplay for that came out years before the movie. And it was one of these kind of, in the making scripts for a long, long time. And it pretty much was the same as the movie. There were some big differences, but I was a big fan of that script. And that, as far as I know, and I didn't do any research, but just because after I read that script, I'm like, who's this guy? He's writing scripts like I want to write. And with that script, I wanted to write things like that, like kind of these kind of small sci-fi thrillers. You know what I mean? Like contained sci-fi thrillers was kind of what I was kind of chasing. And when he wrote that, he kind of jumped on my radar as being like a guy to watch. So after that, I see he wrote The Darkest Hour, which was that like the alien invasion thing with Chloe Moretz or something? I don't know.
I don't remember.
I'd have to click on it to see.
I think that was the fifth wave that you're describing.
Oh yeah, you know what? You're right. I get those two confused. So I don't know what The Darkest Hour is, but that was 2011. He wrote Prometheus in 2012.
Wow.
He wrote Doctor Strange in 2016. Passengers finally got made in 2016 as well. And then he did a few other things that say video. I don't know I don't recognize them, but then he did The Mummy. He did the Tom Cruise Mummy in 2017. And then Dune is his
He's co-writing a lot of these, right?
Absolutely. He's a guy for hire. Like I said, he's a guy, and I don't mean that in a negative sense at all. I wish I was a guy for hire for a blockbuster movie. I wish somebody was hiring me to write Dune or The Mummy.
I just remember Akiva Goldsman did The Mummy too, right? Like, isn't that he's not by himself on that? I think he actually has screen story by, and I sort of remember reading early drafts of The Mummy, and they were quite good before. I mean, I wouldn't say quite good, but better than the Tom Cruise movie that came out. I think Tom Cruise attached, and the movie changed drastically. Like I think made
they
it
got
an
away.
action movie,
Yeah,
a horror movie.
Yeah, because the studio was like, we're paying $200 million. It can't be a horror movie. It has to be action. It can have dark stuff in it, but it has to be action. So he was involved in a very early draft of that. But anyway, a pretty A-list career. Being brought on to very big things and getting those things produced. And it all kind of came from a spec script, which was Passengers. Again, I might be totally wrong about that. Maybe Darkest Hour put him on the map or something like that. But that's when he came on my radar way back when, like maybe, and it was probably around 2010 or something like that. It was a Blacklist script. So, and
did you ever see Passengers? Did you?
I did, and it was okay. I liked it. Okay.
People tend to not like that movie, from what I saw.
People tend not to like it. I think because of the character. There's some character things that kind of undercut how you should feel about the characters. That's all I'll say. But I actually think it's a really clever idea. I was always a big fan of the idea in the script. So Dune Part 2, domestic, international, all that stuff, worldwide, $711 million. Domestic, it did 282, international 429. So at least in recent times, this is as big, as you're going to get. I'm sure if I don't know when the last Fast and the Furious movie came out or something like that. But
it didn't do that well.
Really? The last Fast and the Furious?
It underperformed. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I didn't know.
Yeah.
But this is probably about as big of a box office as you're going to get over the last, I don't know, year, 12 months.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
This is like, that's like saving Hollywood type numbers these days is 700 million. That's
the funny thing is, it almost feels like underperformance for the budget or something. You know what I mean? Like if it
Yeah.
didn't hit $1 billion, that's where my head is, because of all the Fast and the Furious movies that did hit $1 billion, or Aquaman or something, and of course all the Marvel movies, they seem to always hit $1 billion. So in a weird sort of way, my head is like, oh, it only made 711, but that's probably top. I don't know what the top movie is of last year, but it has to
for
be
a prestige sci-fi movie that's as slow and weird as this, that is incredible. You have to admit, just our opinions aside.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Like it's like watching that movie, I'm like, wow, that's a lot of money for that movie.
Yep.
Yeah,
for sure.
Which I think kind of brings us right into the first point: arc plot versus mini plot.
Yeah, I put this on there because I basically just wanted to hear Jamie talk about it. But
we all?
For me, this was one of the things that stuck out while watching the movie was that it doesn't play out like your typical arc plot Hollywood cheeseburger. So I thought this was a good place to, revisit this. Jamie, do you want to kind of explain what we typically do?
Sure. So arc plot, mini plot, cheeseburgers. You might have heard these terms if you listen to any of our other podcasts on here. So this is a thing that actually comes from Robert McGee's story. And it's something it's funny, when I teach screenwriting, I tend to talk about this at the very beginning of my class. This is the first thing I talk about, because I think it's good to kind of set almost like the goals of what you're trying to do right up front. So in arch plot, so the way McGee has it, he does a triangle. He shows you a triangle and he says, stories are on a spectrum. He doesn't, these are my words, but essentially what he's saying, stories are on a spectrum. At the top of the spectrum, you have this arch plot thing. And arch plots are things that have, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, so if I miss one, I apologize. But they have basically the things I preach. They kind of have heroes with a specific goal. The heroes are taking action. They're actively pursuing a goal. There's cause effect in the stories. So meaning one scene causes another scene causes, as opposed to kind of a randomness like daily life might have or something like that. It usually focuses on one character. I mean, at the true arch plot kind of thing. And they usually have closed endings. It usually ends and you can kind of trace the whole story from setup to payoff. It kind of has this closed loop to the math of it all. And that's arch plot. Most of the movies that are blockbusters, like if I look at looking at the 2024 domestic box office, which Dune sits at the top of, I didn't see Godzilla versus Kong, but it probably has an arch plot. I doubt if it gets too artsy.
It does.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
Kung Fu Panda 4 has an arch plot. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes has an arch plot. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire has an arch plot. Bob Marley One Love, maybe not. It's funny, the drop off though, because Bob Marley, that's the 6th biggest movie this year, which is kind of insane, right? But that's 96 million it made. And then there's a whole bunch of movies that made around that. If, The Fall Guy, Wonka, Bad Boys. So Bob Marley One Love might not be an arch plot. So the next one is a thing called mini plot. And that's, I haven't seen Bob Marley One Love. I want to watch it. It's actually on, I think, Paramount Plus or one of those channels. But a lot of times true stories fall in this thing called mini plot. And the best way I can describe mini plot, again, Robert McGee describes them in his book, so you can look that up. But the best way I describe it is it takes the things from arch plot and it doesn't care that much about all of them. It might care about some of them. It might give halfway a try, but like it might have multiple characters. It might have a character without goals or agency. It might be open-ended. It might not really have cause effect from scene to scene. The scenes might be random. And back in my day, coming up in the 90s, when independent film was hot, a lot of movies were mini plots because they kind of represented real life. They were giving you movies like that felt like real life. So things like Bob Marley, that might feel more like real life because it's based on real life. A lot of biopics and stuff end up. We did The Fabelmans last year, and that was kind of a biopic. It's essentially a biopic, and that was definitely mini plot. It was like a series of incidents or vignettes that kind of, if you look at them from a distance, that you can see a life there, but it's not like one plot. It's not like a hero. It's not like Steven Spielberg sets out to conquer the movie industry, and this is the story of that. Instead,
He's got to win Best Picture.
Yeah,
From birth
exactly.
to winning Best Picture.
Exactly. It's like we drop in at various times in his life as there's a theme there, and a lot of times they're kind of unified by theme or by arc or something like that, but it's not as tight as and I don't know the plot of Kung Fu Panda 2, but I'm sure it's like, take down this villain or else bad things will happen. It's not that specific.
We did Kung Fu Panda 1, so it's
We
probably
did.
similar. It's
I'm
similar.
sure it's similar.
Yeah.
The sad thing of this list, and this is very rare for me, but I'll see all these movies eventually. I've only seen Dune Part 2 on this top 10, and Wonka. I saw Wonka as well. So
Wonka's an arc plot.
Yeah,
There
absolutely.
you go.
Absolutely. So anyway, then there's a third thing that we won't talk about as much, but funnily enough, it does have connections in that David Lynch is kind of who I describe as that. It's surreal. It's what they call it anti-plot. And anti-plot is basically, it's almost like a reaction to these things. Like, it's not trying to be a story at all. It's all about vibes, right? It's about feeling. It's about how it makes you feel, and it's juxtaposing all these weird things. And it might not be cause effect. It might not be grounded in reality. It might not even have any heroes. And it's
a recent movie I could think of that would follow that would be Skinamarink.
Yep.
Right? Like Skinamarink would be surreal, right?
Yeah. You could definitely make a case for that movie, at least. And then the thing about it, because it's a spectrum, there's some movies that might be a little surreal and a little anti-plot. Maybe Skinamarink is like that a little bit. It has a little bit of a story.
There's a little something happening there, but
and then there are other movies that might fall in the middle and be a little arch plot, and like McGee actually gives like Wayne's World. He puts that in the anti-plot category because it's so wacky. But I think I don't really buy that. I think that's trending towards an arch plot. It just has touches of surrealness in it, or something like that. But anyway, that's the long-winded answer to Jimmy's question. So now I hand it back to Jimmy for the relevant part.
No,
that was great.
Such a good job of teaching that, explaining that, obviously, because you teach it to people every day.
There's one other thing I should say about it, and it was the reason why I always introduce this first in my class. The reason I introduce this first is because a lot of people try to do arch plot and fail, and then they'll say, well, what about I don't know, Beyond Sunrise or something like that, or something anti-plot, Pulp Fiction or something. And they'll kind of raise their hand and say, okay, Mr. Save the Cat Guy, what about Pulp Fiction or something like that? And I'm like, okay, were you aiming for that? Was that your aim? Or did you just miss and now you're moving the target? and a lot of people miss and move the target. That's what they do. And I'm fine.
You can always edit your raw footage into a surreal movie.
Yeah. And if they want to change the target, that's fine, if that's what they want to do. But a lot of times people are they're kind of it's their lazy excuse for not doing all the work in some ways. Like, so,
but
anyway,
on the other end of the spectrum, Jamie, talking about student work, I mean, most of my job reading amateur scripts, it's very much, it feels like that, like I'm a coach, I'm a teacher more than anything else. And sometimes people think they're doing arc plot and that's their intent, and then you have to explain, no, like, this is, you have zero story DNA here. There's no hero, there's no goal, there's no obstacles. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's what you're going for. And then that's why identifying comps is really, I think it's really helpful. Like, people are always worried about being derivative, but for me, if you can identify those comps and you be like, this is the experience I'm trying to emulate, then that's a lot easier to be like, does my execution match it? So if your comp is like these mini plot or anti-plot, then you're not trying to do Back to the Future. You're not trying to do Star Wars. You know, you're trying to do this weird stuff on purpose. So embrace it. You know, lean into it. But
we've done it on this show, but I would say watch Adaptation.
right,
It's
anything
literally
goes.
about it's really about a writer going, I don't want to do an arc plot. I want to do it's got surreal or mini plot, right? Because he's like, I'm not gonna have car chases or all this stuff, and it's like him fighting himself against not doing that, and then his
he ends
brother
up
is doing
doing
right
in the end.
in the end, right? Yeah, it's about this point.
It's about this process. Yeah,
about
figuring
this,
this out. So
right.
there's a couple things, Jamie, that you say a lot too that I wanted to add on to your just existing way you talk about this that I think is really helpful, especially when it comes to this movie, which is, yeah, you drove home the point of like Archplot hates fate. Archplot is when fate is not what's driving the story. Archplot is cause and effect, causation from A to Z, and the theme is the way we wish the world would be, right? So whereas mini plot leans into fate, it destiny is a crucial part of the storytelling ingredients when it comes to mini plots. It uses fate and destiny as the reason for things that are happening, and the theme ultimately is the way that the world is. This is life, deal with it. And so I think that sort of explains why, like, this is mini plot, right? Because destiny is at the wheel of this story, and I almost feel like if it was looking at it from that perspective, if it was using destiny to create causation, it might not work. It might feel inauthentic, even though it's not a real world. You know, you still feel whether something feels authentic or not. But I wanted to give some of the example. Go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah, and I think with this one too, and it's much like I said with Bob Marley. To me, when I watch this movie, it feels like a history as opposed to a story.
Mhm.
And for that reason, much like these biopics I'm talking about, which are histories and not stories, it has a difficult time, like saying, like making Paul a character with agency. You know what I mean? Like there's no urgency to any of the movie. There's urgency in pieces, but the overall thing is, and they, so notably they reduced the timeline of this by like 3 or 4 years, right? It's one summer. But if you have like 3 or 4 years to kind of dick around in the desert and learn about it tells you that there's not a real urgency to it, right?
Right.
Because
The
you're
book has
basically
no urgency. Yeah,
you're
is what
basically
saying.
just
Yeah.
hanging out. And I mean, from a historical perspective, there might be urgency over a many year period, but you can sense the fact that he's just like in Fremen fantasy camp or whatever for a while of the book. Like he's just learning the ways, and he's got these things in the back of his head, but he can put those off to another day. And that's kind of, oftentimes that feels like the death of Archplot, right? Because it feels like you can put something off for a few days or a week or a year, then it's like, I don't know, the whole thing gets a little loosey. And that's where that's when you almost know you're a mini plot. If your character can just do that.
I feel a real lack of why now in this. Like, there's a part of me that's like, well, like, it's not like the planet is going bad or the spice is going bad or something is going to happen. It's more just like we all hate each other and we want power, and let's see what happens. And there's like nothing specific is going on. Like it's just like somebody killed somebody and they're mad and they go do something else. Does that make sense? Like
yeah.
there's no specific thing that is going on.
Right.
You know, like I don't know.
And
Like,
to your
yeah.
Jamie, to your point about the history, it feeling like a history lesson of the Dune world. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I swear I read that the book has like a wraparound that's basically communicating this as the history of Paul Atreides. I almost feel like that's actually part of the book.
It might be, I don't remember, but with
the Lynch movie starts with like the setup. Remember,
I thought I read that
is that where Florence Pugh's
that the Imperial journals are this movie's way of sort of tapping into the way, the nature of how the Dune book plays out with this is now, and then Paul did this,
Right.
and then
Right.
Paul did this, and then Paul did this, like
almost like the Bible of the Messiah. Or
yes,
something like
exactly.
Right.
Now again, I haven't read the book, so I don't know, but I swear I read that.
I don't
probably
remember.
true. It's just been so long.
It
Yeah.
explains why it feels like that, is what I'm saying. It's the nature of the source material. But I did want to show how kind of, so often when we talk about these mini plot movies that are made in Hollywood, for instance, The Fabelmans, like you described, The Fabelmans still uses a sequence method, and if you like this topic and you go back and listen to that episode, we broke down every sequence of the movie where it drops us in media res into the middle of something, some new vignette of Steven Spielberg's life, and this major event that led to the ultimately him being a filmmaker, a famous filmmaker. But within that sequence, there is like story DNA. So there is a goal with a deadline and obstacles and stakes and reward that's within this like little 10-minute section of the movie. And then he either fails or succeeds. And then we're dropped in like 2 years later to just another random vignette with another little story DNA, little why here, why now. And I do think that there are several sequences of this movie that actually do that. So we're dropped into they're raiding the Harkonnen spice mining vessel sequence. We're dropped in the middle of it. We don't know what's happening. Paul's running around, Chani's running around. Something's happening, but we don't know, and we get like a minute of orientation where we're like, okay, because they're gonna raid this vessel, and then we have a story goal. We have, will they successfully destroy this mining goal? And we have obstacles, right? The Harkonnen soldiers. We have urgency before the Harkonnen soldiers kill them, and so the sequence has its own little mini why here, why now, and your classic story DNA. And then there's another sequence where we drop in and Chani and Paul are just having a conversation on top of a dune. And she's like, this is a big day. And you're like, what's this big day? Like, what the hell's going on? And then we learn that this is his day where he's going to ride a worm for the first time. And so that becomes its own story goal, right? Like mini goal. Will Paul successfully survive riding the worm? And the stakes are like his survival. The reward is that all the Fremen will believe he's the Messiah. So it has like its own built-in story DNA. And then there's like defending Arrakis against the Harkonnen invasion. We're once again dropped in the middle when Dave Bautista's bringing the pain on Arrakis, and we're like, are they gonna? It has its own goal again, right? Are they going to defend the castle from the invading Harkonnens? So for all the time we're talking about it feeling like it's meandering, we do get dropped into these like situations that have all the things that we go for to experience in a Hollywood cheeseburger arc plot. It's just the problem is like he's rarely focused on like an overall goal, right? And that's why I wanted to talk about the photo finish and how that plays into this movie's structural approach. Jamie, you mind explaining the photo finish?
Yeah, no problem. So when we talk about story DNA, which is kind of the essence of a logline, there's a hero who is trying to achieve a goal. They need to overcome obstacles to achieve the goal, or else some horrible thing, stakes will happen. And so when we talk about a hero trying to achieve a goal, like Indiana Jones is trying to capture the lost Ark of the Covenant for the US or for the Allies before the Nazis get it. That's his goal. He's trying to get it. And the photo finish is what I always say to students is you don't want your goal to be Indiana Jones wants to be happy, right? Or something like that. And
we laugh every time.
But he does want to be happy, Jamie.
Right. Right.
Draw me at the end of Indiana Jones. It's just Harrison Ford smiling.
And I'll say, yeah, exactly. So I'll say, I say, give me something that you can take a picture of. And what Jimmy just said is what always happens. They'll draw me a picture of Indiana Jones smiling in the end. It'll be like I satisfied
with a thumbs up.
Yeah. But if you can think of a moment that they could actually take a picture of, like this, I know this isn't the goal for Star Wars necessarily, but if it was destroying the Death Star, and you could take a picture of it blowing up. Really, the goal in Star Wars is getting the plans to the rebels, but you could take a picture of that. You could take a picture of them handing the droid over to the rebels. That's
You can take
kind
a
of
picture of Marty McFly being home.
Yeah.
The ones I always
There's
pick
the
is
actual picture.
Yeah.
There's a literal photo of it. Yeah.
so it's funny that the one I show in my slides, I show Back to the Future, because it's in the title. The goal is in the title. Back to the
Photo
Back to the
finish is
Future.
in
Yeah.
the title. Yeah.
Finding Nemo. It's in the title. Take a
In the
picture. I
title.
found Nemo. Okay. Then there's other ones
The
like
photo finish.
Wizard of Oz, when she comes back and she's sitting there surrounded by people. You can take a picture of it. Now, is Dorothy happy in the end? Could you say their goal is to be happy? Yes. But
Yeah, she's happy that
That's the reward, though.
she's happy that she got her photo finished, though.
and
Yeah.
and there's a whole
Yeah.
nother thing with kind of their want. Their want is to be happy, and that's what drives them to achieve a goal and things like that. And it might be to be happy. And also just instructionally, if you are stuck and you're like, man, I want my character to overcome grief or something like that. Like that's your thing, is I want them to be happy again and overcome grief. Ask yourself, what in the story do they think will make them happy and overcome grief? And that's usually your goal. If you can come up with something they can pursue, an embodiment of that. And whatever that is, it could be, like in this case, it could be revenge or something like that. I don't know. Like, I need to
Letting
kill the
go of
Baron.
something.
Yeah, or whatever. So anyway, that's the photo finish.
Yeah. And so I wanted to say, like, do you think the photo finish comes into play despite this being mostly a mini plot movie?
There's a loose revenge angle here, but I think he's kind of a Hamlet character where he kind of is delaying. Like, I don't think he burns for the maybe I missed that. I don't know. I don't. Do you feel like he burns for the revenge? I think it's more just like he's trying to figure out how to get revenge or what the best move is.
Self-actualization is more important than the revenge.
Yeah, you're probably right. That probably makes a lot of sense.
Well, want versus need, right?
Right.
That you're both just speaking to want versus need right there.
Yeah.
The movie. So like I tried to track it just for this topic, and there's one scene that's like 40 minutes in where Jessica, his mom, and I probably have the exact lines here. I cut and pasted them. They're sitting there having a conversation about the situation, and I didn't keep the line, but he's basically like, she's like, your dad didn't believe in vengeance, and he's like, I'm not my father. And so like they establish early on that he wants vengeance,
right.
But then
I think he says I do or something.
I
like
do,
that.
yeah. And but then the movie doesn't keep coming back to that. That's what it is. We're missing those status updates about the arch plot goal that they just described there.
That's where I say it doesn't feel like he burns. It's not like John Wick. You know what I mean? Like, that's all I'm going to think about till I get him.
And you made me think of something that we talk about in this show a lot that this movie doesn't have. To your point, Jamie and Bob, when we've broken down vengeance stories like John Wick, like Pig, the vengeance clock is, there's ever-present urgency when there's a vengeance agenda, right? Because the character is just hyper-focused on this vengeance, and so even the bad thing already happened. The deadline is already up.
I want my revenge now.
Revenge is like the loophole in the why now kind of thing. And that
there's your answer, Bob. They it's almost like they think because that's in play, then the bad thing already happened, and that's your why now. But then since Paul is not like bloodthirsty in the middle section of the movie, it doesn't feel you don't feel that emotional connection.
I wouldn't even call this a revenge movie in any form. It doesn't feel like that. It sort of feels like he kind of gets to the end and he's like, oh, well, you did this to me, and so I shall do this to you. You know what I mean? Like, it's like kind of an offhand thing.
Yeah, I actually think, Jamie, tell me what you think about this. I think it kind of tries to put a patch on it and give us the Hollywood arch plot photo finish where he gets vengeance against the Baron and the Emperor as he stated 2 hours before, but then didn't care about for the rest of the movie. So he does the very thing he says to his mother he's gonna do, and we get the photo finish, vengeance for his father. He takes the throne from the Emperor, and it's just most of the movie he's not actively shown seeking that.
What
he plays the
doing
long game.
Yeah, but does it feel like the long game? Do you think he drank the water of life so that one day he could get revenge? It doesn't feel like that's the reason, right?
That's what makes it so weird, Bob, because yeah, I agree with you.
It's not the motivation for him doing that.
Like, to me, it feels like all of a sudden in the third act, and maybe I misread this, but I watched it twice to try to understand, and then I watched like a bunch of videos that we shared between each other to try to explain what the fuck was going on. And it feels like the third act is like the Phantom Menace third act. All of a sudden, we have a clear goal with a deadline and a plan and an agenda with goal, reward, stakes. All of a sudden, the movie kicks into a traditional Hollywood third act, and there's momentum and there's a goal. And it's like, for me, it doesn't actually care. Paul, we don't see Paul like striving for this vengeance until this last like half hour, but he spends so little time talking about it, because Denis V doesn't like dialogue. That it's hard to feel that by the end he got the thing he was going for the whole time. Like, we don't feel like we were rooting for that to happen for him, at least in my opinion.
It's not like there's a voiceover where it's like, if I just do this, it's another step towards getting my revenge.
Yeah, like the fetus is going, you have to seek vengeance,
right,
father,
right.
Anyway, so is your answer that the photo finish doesn't apply here?
I don't think so. And
okay,
not to the
revenge story. Yeah. I would say that maybe to the other story of him becoming the Muad'Dib, right? That's the photo finish of that, right?
It's interesting. I'll jump ahead to a talking point a little bit because it's related to this. But the whole time I was watching, and this is no great insight or hot take, it feels like this would work much better as a television series. It would be like trying to adapt Game of Thrones into a movie. I think it would be very difficult to do. And it would have a lot of these same problems where you had to kind of give people the gist of things and just move on very fast through things. But in TV, like in my TV book, I have a thing where I say the first thing you need to come up with for your TV show is a world and a story engine. And story engines aren't the same as a person going after a goal. They are reoccurring situations of like a situation that keeps giving you conflict week after week after week. Okay. And I came up with 8 franchise types to help people out, and just super quick. They're I'm not even going to go into like what they are. You kind of know from the name, but Trapped Together is like the sitcoms and the The Office and things like that. Blank of the Week or the procedurals. Man with a Plan is somebody pursuing like a season-long pursuit. This has elements of Man with a Plan. Like there's a long-term pursuit, whether it's, taking over the Baron's spot or whatever,
I'm sure if you watch the Dune TV shows, it would be similar to
right.
Right.
And then there's Man with the Season-Long Problem, and that's more like 24 or something like that.
Yeah.
Or The Handmaid's Tale. Why Donuts, I'm No Fool, Buddy Love. So some of these are similar than Save the Cat franchise. But then I have one called Mad Mad World, and that's where I put Game of Thrones, I put The Wire, and basically I say these shows are more interested in the world and the world building, and there's all kinds of nooks and crannies of conflict in this world. Like you can look at any piece of the world, whether it's him trying to prove himself to the Fremen, whether it's the Baron trying to convince the Emperor to do something. And if you just look around the world, it has kind of these conflicts. I feel like that's what this is. And we keep just jumping into different pieces of it that could be their own movie. or they could be. You could
Their own
almost
episode.
or their own TV episode is really what
I mean,
they should be.
I was thinking that when watching it, like, this is the Fade Rotha episode.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly.
This is the 45 minutes we get to introduce us to who Fade Rotha is, right?
Yep. And the danger when adapting these kind of things to a film is you have to move through it very fast. You have to cut a lot of exposition. Like, you basically can't dwell on it or give all the details or bring it into that tight loop that an arch plot would be, because you have so much to do. And they're trying to cover all these different political factions. There's, the witches are doing their thing, the barons doing their thing, the emperor's doing their thing, the Fremen are doing their thing, the Fremen are split, Paul's doing something, Jessica's doing something. They're all doing these things. Game of Thrones, it works brilliantly for the first few seasons because you have time to do it. You have time to spend whole episodes with groups of people and focus on things. And you can park Paul for an episode and go to this other thing and do this stuff. I just think that's really what this, for better or worse, I think this feels like it needs to be a very expensive TV show. And that's what it feels like to me. And
when this was announced, I actually said Denis' devotion to how he views cinema is going to stop this from being what it should be, because he views TV as a lesser art form. And
he doesn't like
I
dialogue.
literally I said this to several friends when this was announced. I'm taking the credit because he just views it as lesser, so he'll never let it be what it should be, which is it should be.
You mean given like what the audience expectations are in 2024?
I'm sure HBO and Warner Brothers were like, you could do it as a series. I'm sure that was thrown to him, and he was like, absolutely not. It's a cinema. That's how he views everything. It's cinema. So it's like that. It's not what Jamie is saying because of the man in charge of this specific franchise.
Denny V.
Denny V.
I almost feel like this whole 3-hour whatever movie needs 12 hours. That's what I think. And then you could spend whole episodes on things and people with their own stories, and each episode would have stories. So you wouldn't be looking at it at this big picture, like, what is Paul's goal? Instead, it would be like, what's
Paul's goal this week?
What's Paul's goal this week? What's the Baron's goal this week? What's this week?
And then you could understand it and follow along and care and have emotions. Do I want them to succeed? Do I want them to fail?
And I actually, my mind is filling in the cracks when I watch this movie and I see all that world building and all that stuff. And I'm actually, for whatever reason, I don't usually like world building and stuff, but for whatever reason with Dune, I'm really into it. Like, I like the idea of this like seated Messiah myth, and I like the idea of like the setting they're in where they have to drain people of their water just to survive and all this stuff. I really like the world building here, and I could use 12 hours of it, but I do think the 3 hours just doesn't. It's like impossible mission.
If I had the time, I might actually still do it. The 2000 TV series that covers this book.
Yeah,
I kind of want to watch it to see if
I've never seen it. To be honest,
you're nearby, Jamie.
Yeah.
There's also a Children of Dune sequel series to it, and I'm like, maybe that's the ideal adaptation. I just never knew about it
because there's time to
do all this. The effects probably aren't as good. It probably doesn't look as good, but
I think that's the only problem. I think because they had smaller budgets and smaller prestige, they had limitations. They took story notes. They did all that stuff that they had compromises that he doesn't have. He doesn't have compromises for those reasons. His compromises are because of the medium he's choosing to tell the story in.
Yeah,
and it's a different compromise,
and he won't bend on the medium ever.
Right. And I do think there is like an HBO show, but I think it's like the prequel or something.
It's 10,000 years before the movies.
So is it the time of like when they had robots and computers? Is it?
I don't know, but I know
Butlerian War.
It's following the Bene Gesserits 10,000 years ago.
Is that based on a book?
I don't know.
Is that just new stuff?
I really don't know.
Yeah,
I got less excited when it was 10,000 years before the Knights of the Old Republic of Dune series.
That's another thing. That's another thing that fascinates me about the world building of this. It's like the idea that he did a sci-fi story and was like, let's do this without computers and let's do it. You know what I mean? I think that's a really cool idea. Like
I do too.
he's like taking away a lot of the stuff you would use.
I feel like we're all kind of saying if the Denny V TV show of this we'd all be really into.
Yeah.
We're kind of all
Absolutely.
saying that. So we're not, don't think we're just like crapping on it. It's,
No. I'm watching this almost like, oh, I like this world. I like these things. I just think for me to understand it and have the urgency and stuff like that, I think I'd need a TV show, to be honest.
Jamie, I had one thing I wanted to ask back on the mini plot before we move forward. When do you think that a spec writer out there who's listening, who's debating, they're hearing this, they're going, okay, like how should I approach my story? Should I tell it as an arc plot? Should I tell it as a mini plot? When do you think is a good time to choose mini plot over arc plot?
That's a good question. I think it comes back to those comparables you mentioned.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So like if you're setting out to do like, I want to be the next, not Dune, but I want to be the next, what's a spec? What's an original movie that was popular? I don't know. It's hard to think of one.
Memento.
Memento. Well, that might be a little bit too, of a thing.
I went hard. Yeah.
But whatever. If you want to be the next Ghostbusters, let's go way back, right? If I want to be the next Ghost, you're probably in arch plot territory. You probably don't want to, because keep in mind, arch plot starts with the mass audience. So let's say 100% of the audience likes arch plot or something, or let's say 90%. Let's say there's 10% that are like, I don't like that Hollywood BS. I just want to do the Charles cinema in our world or whatever, which is the art house cinema. So let's say that's 90%. Well, once you choose arch plot, you're probably alienating. You're probably ending up with like 40% of the audience. You know what I mean? So you're probably way down in the audience. So it's important to know budget and things like that when you're deciding what to do. I mean, this is a very unscientific, unthought of answer.
I put you on the spot.
Yeah.
You really put you.
But it's why I'm coming back to comparables. Like, I really do think you have to say, I want to be the next Ghostbusters versus, I want to be the next Nomadland. And if you're in Nomadland territory, then look at that and say, well, that's real life. That's not this Hollywood BS has set up and payoff and does all. By the way, when I say Hollywood BS, that's what I write. But it doesn't have all this setup and payoff and all this stuff. But on the flip side, you might write a horror movie, and while horror movies feel like cheeseburgers because they get ghettoized and stuff like that a lot, they actually often are mini plots because they represent kind of this real life, and then you throw a monster in it. You know what I mean? You just throw a monster in it. So it's a story about like grief, like Hereditary or something like that.
Yep, we talked about this very topic on Halloween and Hereditary.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
To your point.
So anyway, my bigger picture is figure out your comparables, figure out what you're going to do. And once you figure that out, once you kind of know, I'm setting out to write this kind of movie, this kind of feel, you'll know because you'll look at those other movies and you'll be like, oh, that's obviously an arch plot. I'm writing an arch plot here. Or you'll be like, oh, this is kind of a fringe movie. This is a movie that appeals to a certain type of people. And just from a commercial perspective, like what you should be writing as a writer, I think both are fine. Like, I think you can make a name for yourself in either of those worlds. And I wouldn't even say one is more popular than the other. That all comes down to concept. Like, if you're writing about like a biopic about yourself and how you went to art school or something, or, then you might be in trouble or something, unless it's a really good story.
Is that what you read all day in class, Jamie?
Biopics.
It's funny. No, I teach at an art school, but they write. They're all on such a diet of anime and stuff like that. That usually it's stuff like that I get. Usually it's about swords and wizards and things like that. They're kind of in the other spectrum.
I mean, more arc plot too, right?
Yeah, and they are more arch plot. Yep.
Okay.
Sure. But anyway,
that's
where
Jamie.
I'd say figure out your comparables, figure out the story you're going to tell.
Cool. We kind of touched on it, but because we talked about world building, but lessons in world building.
Yeah, I just
Who's
wanted
this?
to. This is mine. This is mine. I
Okay.
just wanted to go through a couple things because, to me, like I said, I am most impressed by this, and this goes back to Frank Herbert more than it's the screenplay, obviously. Um, but this to me is, in some ways, to me it might stand above a lot of the other stories for world building. You could go Game of Thrones, but I think that has its derivatives in some ways, or derives from other things that came before it. It's almost a reaction to things that came before it. Lord of the Rings certainly is great world building, but it, it's almost hard for me to judge that because it feels like that's always existed. It feels like that was here like before time, like it was handed to us. So sometimes I don't get that the credit it deserves. Um, but this thing coming out in the 60s, like it kind of blows me away that somebody was in the 60s coming up with this very sophisticated, in some ways realistic world. And even the things that it comes up with, like the weird stuff. The term you hear a lot of is it's like one step removed from reality. Like you throw the spice in there and it's not real, but it feels like one step, like that's the magic, and then it messes everything else up. And I think Frank Herbert does a great job with the complexity. It's super well researched and detailed, the history of it. It feels like a lived-in world. It feels like all the questions we have, and honestly, some of the frustration we have, they're like answers to these things. You just have to go search for them. They're not necessarily in this
I think
movie, which is
our
part of the problem.
frustrations are with the movie,
Right.
but I also feel like maybe you guys did too. I also feel like he could answer them if I asked.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
so I
Well,
think that's the
or a
frustration.
Dune fanatic could answer
A
them.
Dune fanatic could answer
Dude,
them,
dude,
and
totally.
and
Yeah.
and
So
in some
it's
ways,
not a
But
knock
the
against
movie
Herbert.
doesn't
The
answer
movie
them.
doesn't. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And in order to feel what the movie wants us to feel, we need the answer
right,
in the movie.
right,
That's the problem.
and I do like how the backstory on how he came up with this was he was somebody that was very interested in ecology, and he was studying dunes and sand and deserts, and he kind of went nutty. He was studying it for an article, and he came up with so much research that suddenly it gave him the idea to do this science fiction version of it. So, and it was all kind of built from there. And to me, that's what I really like about like the his characters, like the way he constructs his characters is based on this kind of Dune world and things like that, and the things they do and the things they need. And there's just all these things that springboard from this one kind of cool idea that was very original when he came up with it. With like, let's do a desert planet in a soap opera. Now or a space opera, not a soap opera. And now we've seen it in other things. Obviously, Star Wars comes to mind right away, which borrowed heavily from this. But just coming up with that one thing, whether it be the environment or a technology or a character, and just then how complex he got with all the world building things is just I think it's worth noting, just how much you have to, if you're going to do a world building thing, you really have to. I was going to say, I'm trying to figure out the right words, but you have to make it original. Like so many of the world building things I see now, and again, I think the Dune planet at the time was very original. So many things now feel like Star Wars with a nudge, or Guardians of the Galaxy with a nudge. But I think the magic of this is it's more than a nudge. He came up with this Dune planet and then built things around that, as opposed to saying, let's just do Star Wars, but I'll make the politics a little different or something,
Yeah,
or
I would say that the great thing about Dune is like it feels like the world building he did with their history and everything. It's like, what would these people, if they lasted thousands of years on a sand planet, come up with as their traditions and their religion and everything?
yes.
And those answers, the whiteboarding of those
Yes.
answers is amazing, and that's all him.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
it's like they would worship these worms. They would have pools underground, and they would worship the water that comes from our bodies, and it's all very straightforward from the premise, right? It's
Mhm.
really well done in that way. It's really built out.
Exactly.
from that one idea, you know.
And it's not on the talking points, but it's doing what we preach on this show, which it's delivering genre expectations using what's unique about the story world and the premise,
Yes.
which is
Yeah.
like, you know, it's fantasy. So we got the elixirs, the water of life,
Right.
the dragons with Dune paint are worms. We've got the warring kingdoms, you know, with Dune paint are the great houses, and they're different planets instead of different lands on the, you know, on the kingdom map, and, you know, all these things. So
Yep, it's that paint, that Dune paint. So premise paint. How can you paint things we've seen before in this new paint that you come up with? That's basically a sand planet. Like, what is that? And I really think that's the key to good world building. So I think if you're a world builder, instead of just being like, instead of clerics, I'm going to call them high priests or whatever, you know. I think that's the thing. You have to come up with that nugget of something original and then start painting stuff and then start asking yourself questions. What do you need on that planet and how do you expand from that?
Our last episode was Fury Road. I feel like you could apply all the things we just said
Absolutely.
to that.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Like, totally. Miller did this wonderfully.
And it's very rare. I see a lot of people that want to world build that's why they're into storytelling. They might come from role-playing games or video games or something like that, but they miss that part. They just give me another generic zombie wasteland or whatever. And it just feels like the same. So anyway, I just wanted to point that part out.
Cool. Common fantasy writing problems. Who's this?
this is me.
All right.
So as contradicting the praise we just gave. So, you know, this show is a monument to the whiteboarding process. This doesn't have to be a whiteboard. It could be a notebook. It could be an app on your phone. It could be, personally, I take junk mail and I use the backs of envelopes. I have boxes and boxes of junk mail, and I have been writing now for years, like on the backs of junk mail envelopes. That's my whiteboard. So the problem is, we want you to do that process, to do the what if exercises, to, you know, squeeze all the creative juice out of the concept and the story world. But once you do that, you can't give us all of those ideas. Like, you can't show it all. To quote the Ted Elliott, the co-writer of Pirates of the Caribbean and many other things, he writes with Terry Rossio, the way to make a boring movie is to show us everything. And so we've talked about on previous fantasy movies that we've covered, this problem that I see a lot. So I've read hundreds of epic sci-fi or epic fantasy or hybrids amateur scripts. I've read dozens of scripts that are like over 200 pages long as like a spec script for a movie. Like, I have read the person who's only written one script's version of Dune so many times. And it usually comes with very common problems that they all do, that I think this movie does. And that's the main reason I'm bringing it up, because I think if it wasn't made from a source material that is so world renowned, if this came across the desk of someone whose job it was to, like, say recommend or, you know, or no, I think you'd have a hard time getting a recommend. That's just me being an asshole, but that's the reality. And I kind of wanted to go over how this movie does what the common amateur fantasy script does. And I'll try to breeze through some of this. Now, in contrast, the previous episode, we did this very topic with Fury Road and showed how it has a big world and just so shows us a small window of that world. And so in contrast, Fury Road doesn't do any of these things wrong. It only shows us little pieces of each of these windows. So the first big world, big window problem is your geographical world window is too big on screen. You're showing us too much of the world on screen, too many territories, too many locations, which means too many warring factions, which means too many alliances and too many enemies and too many plans, you know.
Yeah.
There's literally a line in this movie where where the Bene Gesserit says plans atop of plans. Like, yes, you're right, sister. That's a problem. That's why I don't understand what the fuck is going on.
Who likes who again?
Yeah.
This point reminds me of our Willow episode, because
Mhm.
you brought this up specifically, how Willow does it really well and having
It's only two.
It's only two, and we understand it straight back and forth.
Mhm.
I thought about Willow while watching this. I was like, this is no Willow. I was like, I don't know what's happening anymore.
Side note, I had some friends chime in who listened to the Willow episode who told me and they're huge fantasy fans. And they're like, that's why I don't like Willow.
Right.
So there's an argument to be made that, well, fuck you guys. You don't like fantasy, you know? Yeah. To Jamie, going back to your Game of Thrones example, this is my stats. I'm pretty sure these stats are accurate because I looked them up just for this. Game of Thrones has 16 story world territories and 7 kingdom houses. And together, because there's multiple factions within each of those territories, even in each of those houses, there are 23 warring factions in Game of Thrones. Okay, 23. Now, the only way you keep up with that is by like giving us an episode for each of those worlds and their warring factions within the world. And then you get an episode where you understand who's in charge. You understand the alliances, the rivalries, the agendas, the languages, all the things that come with like explain opening a window into the world. Lord of the Rings, you know, this is kind of why some people don't like Lord of the Rings, you know, because they do give us a lot of the world, but they slow build it over the course of 3 movies. Harry Potter has this same problem. There's 4 warring houses in warring factions in Harry Potter, plus Voldemort's team, which is a 5th warring faction in the Harry Potter world. But like what I go back to, and sorry to compare this to Star Wars, but we're doing it. Like imagine Star Wars, which took a lot from Dune, as Jamie said. Imagine if you had the Empire versus the Rebellion versus the other Empire versus the other Rebellion versus the other Empire versus the other Rebellion. All of a sudden, it's really hard to connect with because you're like,
your friends would love it.
But backing it up to where I started with this, most of the scripts that I'm given that are playing in this sandbox, that's what I see.
It's lots of factions.
We get 4 to 6 warring factions. We get 40 to 50 locations. We get 5 to 6 planets. It's just the window is so big.
I don't really support writing those kind of scripts in general, but just because I think you should write a novel maybe or something. But even in that case, one of the things I think is really important if you're doing this is limit your POVs. If each of those factions has their own POVs, like we jump to the moon of Endor or whatever, thing, and it's this other faction is talking about it, and then we jump to this other. But if you can limit your POVs to window, that's what Harry Potter, I think, does really well, right? The POV is kind of limited to the kids. So we're not jumping around to like and there's a little bit of jumping around in Harry Potter to secret meetings and stuff, but it's not as much as this, where it's like, let's go to the Baron, let's go to the Emperor, let's go to this. And it's like a soap opera. Mm-hmm. And Game of Thrones does it too. And that's why I think this should be a TV show as opposed to a.
That's why you can digest it and understand it and emotionally connect with it, because you're given the time to understand it. So, but Bob, going back to what you were bringing up about Willow. So in all these episodes, Willow, Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves, and Mad Max Fury Road's worlds, geographical windows were all really small. That's why they were easy to connect with. In comparison, Dune's geographical window is the Harkonnen planet, the Emperor's planet, Arrakis, and really all these different territories within Arrakis. And that there's 5 warring factions on screen. There's the Bene Gesserit's window with all of their things. There's the Emperor, his daughter, and his personal army, the Sardaukar window, because they're their own thing.
Yeah. On a different planet too.
On a different planet. There's the Harkonnen window. There's the Arrakis window. And Jamie, you brought this up a few minutes ago. The Arrakis window actually has 3 factions, which is you have
North,
these
South.
the people called the Quizeret, which are the Messiah believers who are like all about the Messiah. And then you have the Fedaykin, which is the warriors. And then you have the non-believers who are like, fuck all of you guys, you know, and they're all even against each other and warring within each other. And then you have Paul, Gurney, and the other surviving Atreides window still. And they have their own. So all of these factions each have their own characters, their own belief systems. All that shit's on screen. Their own languages, their own histories we hear about, their own agendas, their own alliances, and their own rivalries. And so we have 5 different factions with characters, belief systems, languages, histories, agendas, alliances, and rivalries to keep up with. And that's why, and so we get this gigantic window, right? We get in, but we're never given enough time to look through that window long enough to understand it and to feel what they want us to feel about that window. So I just think if you're writing a story like this, you should keep you can make that giant whiteboard and world building that Frank Herbert did, but you might want to try a different medium in order to help, you know, make us feel what you want us to feel about all that cool world building you did. If
you're making a 2-hour movie,
yeah,
that's when you worry about this problem. If
yeah,
you're making a TV show, really, right? Like it's about the format. It's a
pilot with a Bible full of this is amazing.
Willow is what, like 90 some minutes, you know, like that's the reason that Willow has 2 factions. And that works.
Yeah, and for people that are really into this kind of thing and their whole reason wants to be to do this, to create worlds, to do that, there are other options. You can write a novel, you can write a pilot,
make a game.
Here's the other trick, I would say, and we've talked about it many times, the small window, the big world, but I'll use Vin Diesel as my example. Write Pitch Black. Don't write Chronicles of Riddick first. Write Pitch Black first. That's what you need to do. And
there you go.
Yeah, imagine if you wrote the Pitch Black version of Dune. You know, some small story that exists in this huge, vast, you know, complex world building creation of yours. That's how you write a spec script. Now, again, I'm not saying that's what they should have done here. They're adapting a huge book and everybody wants to see the huge book.
Sure.
I'm more giving this as a lesson to people that are kind of pissed off right now.
Riddick's an original property.
Yes. Yeah. Like I built these worlds and I want to write them, and, you know, screw you guys. This is what I love. And my only suggestion is maybe look at Pitch Black, like do the Pitch Black version or whatever that is. We've talked about Terminator on this show and things like that. Do that version. Do that first.
Funny, because Chronicles of Riddick is also like kind of trying to be as large as Dune. It's something really as nuts as that. Yeah,
it would probably make an interesting episode of this show.
I love that movie. I'm down. I'll watch that 10 times.
Maybe someday. Before I go into the next section, I will just say, like, when I get this script, I actually don't. The maybe choose another medium is like my very last note. It's not the focus of my note. I usually go like, you can do this, like, and you can make it as awesome as like this beautiful cake you're trying to bake. And you can make it taste good. You just have to limit the window so that we just see the Willow Dungeons and Dragons Fury Road version of this gigantic world, you know, like you can do this big of a world as long as you just show us a story that just gives us a glimpse of the other stuff, you know.
This has 5. Fury Road has arguably 4, right?
And yeah, but they're all like kind of together in this one little gang.
It's got the world building, but they all agree on something.
Yeah, and like, it really just feels like one. Yeah. But the next problem within big world, big window problem is too many speaking roles, and like I usually suggest consolidating the cast window. This isn't as bad as you know, a lot of this stuff usually is. There's 18 speaking roles, but again, the problem is we're barely given enough time with most of them. to care, and so it's not really that big of a problem in this one. The next one, though, I definitely want to talk to you guys about is the next common problem is big world, big mythology window, like mythology overload. And like when I get fantasy or sci-fi scripts, I'm given 3 to 5 prophecies, right? Prophecy on top of prophecy on top of prophecy. And in comparison, Willow has 1 prophecy. Dungeons and Dragons has 1 prophecy. Mad Max Fury Road has 1 prophecy, The Green Place. Dune actually has 2 prophecies. And I feel like this is maybe one of the most confusing things in the story, because they wait a long time to like really clarify. And that is, there's 2 prophecies. There's the Kwisatz Haderach. I hope that I'm saying that right. Where the Bene
Probably not,
Gesserit,
but
the Bene, I know, who knows what it is.
I don't. Yeah.
The Bene Gesserit believe that there's a being named that name who can possess immeasurable power, and due to this belief, they have been interfering with the bloodlines of royal houses in the Dune universe. And also because of this belief, they have created a second prophecy, which is a false prophecy, and the one we spend the most time on in the movie. Like, this is the one, like, when I got this clarity, I was like, wait, so the Lisan al-Gaib prophecy is actually not real. It's created by the Bene Gesserits in order to manipulate the Fremen culture, because they think that one day someone is going to become the other prophesized person on Arrakis, and they can like get the Fremen to help them with that prophesized person.
I mean, to some degree, both prophecies do feel fake in their own way.
Yeah,
there's no real. There's kind of no real prophecy. Like,
right?
You know what I mean? Like, we're kind of told both are kind of manufactured. Like, they're like, they believe something, but they've also been fucking with it the entire time throughout history. So it's like nothing is.
But there's so much time spent on these things.
I know.
And they're so confusing. Like, I had a hard time like writing this down and articulating it for the sake of the podcast.
You know what's even
and also,
worse?
He fulfills the fake one.
Yeah,
like, he does.
Yeah.
And you know what's even,
people that like are Dune fans are hating this episode.
What's even worse about it, and they didn't put this in, but the sequels rely on the fact that they seeded similar but different prophecies all over the galaxy. Because then when he shows up doing a holy war, they can join in. They could be like, "Oh, the Messiah is here. Let's join in with the Messiah."
So the actual Dune universe does have like prophecy on top of prophecy on top of prophecy.
It's like per planet prophecy.
Oh my god!
It's kind of though. I mean,
I'm sorry, Dune lovers.
It's kind of more like witch propaganda though than anything else. You know, it's all fuel. It all comes from the same place.
And I understand that, right?
Yeah, remember Jimmy earlier today when I was saying like you got to just think of Dune as like an oil war. It's like about oil, right? It's just spices the oil.
Spices oil, yeah.
And the oil, we're lied to by the government how much about what that, like they're trying to make everything not about oil, but it's always all about oil.
There's this environmentalist leader who's gonna save the.
But that's what this is. It's like them creating all these massive fake lies in order to just who controls the spice, who controls the power.
But there's so much time spent just like dramatizing these prophecies, and then what they are and what they mean are, after all of that time, still confusing to me after watching 2 movies and explainer videos. I mean, maybe that's just because I'm dumb.
No, I don't think it's that. I think that Dune is confusing to some degrey.
Okay,
I mean,
so the next one is the big world, big magic window. Mm-hmm. And I'm reading fantasy skips with 3 to 5 magic systems, magic system on top of magic system. Each magic system has its own rules, and then each magic system has its own magical objects that are playing within those rules. There's the black magic and the gold magic and the red magic and the white magic, and I'm getting scripts, and I've said this before that I have to make like grimoires and then I'll send someone like a 20-page document of just their magic systems that are in the script, and I'm like, This is 20 pages of your 200-page script that's just explaining the magic systems. Maybe you only need one. To this movie's credit, they really only have one magic system, but I think that magic system is fucking confusing. And it's basically the Bene Gesserit's power. They have psychic powers and then they have voice powers. Those are two different things, but they're kind of just the same magic system. But like, my question to you guys, this is the thing about the movie that bothers me the most, and I think it's a writing lesson, and I don't know what that writing lesson is, but I feel like if the writing was clearer, then I wouldn't be having these questions. I wanted to ask you guys if you also have these questions, which is like, what are the limitations of these psychic powers?
So the interesting thing, and this is another thing I do like about the premise paint of the witches themselves, or the Bene Gesserit, is so they are people that after they made robots and computers illegal, they dive into having total control of their bodies in some ways, right? So most of their powers are related to, imagine if you could have total control of your body or something like that. Imagine if you went into the science of that. So it's not even magic. It's like through concentration and practice, they have, and I mean, this is kind of like the Force in some weird way. Because then what I do like about it is like the voice is something they can control. Now, how they figured out that yelling like the way they do can kind of silence somebody into shock and things like that, there's a buy-in there, there's a certain buy-in, but in like the weirding way, the way they fight, like they can like twitch their finger and punch you and knock you out or something like that. There's a lot of interesting world building mixed in with that, that I do think, again, is probably deeper in the books and more fascinating in the books because they can kind of explain it, where here it's just kind of like they show it instead of tell it, but then you're like, what what was that? And it's just the way it has to be.
Oh, she can do that? Great.
Yeah.
I don't
like, what's that thing?
Like, my question to you guys is, okay, like, did I miss something? Like, how far can the connection stretch? Like, we see it stretch into the spirit world. We see it stretch into the dream world. We see it stretch across planets. We see Jessica somewhere, and then, like, her husband dies across the other side of the planet, and she's like, he's gone now. Like, what are the limitations? And if they can do all of that and know all of that, why are they ever not in control? You know what I mean? And then we learn that Paul has these powers too, and then it's like, why isn't he using these powers? You know what I mean? Like,
I think you're not wrong from like a script story
the
viewer.
Execution is what I'm asking.
Well, that, but
yeah,
right. I think that my only answer could be the explanation that so many people embrace this, specifically this movie. We're talking about part 2, this movie, and in general, is I think there's some leadway with the actual story. They're willing to go with, like, the characters kind of don't know the answer either.
Yeah.
I don't think that the Bene Gesserits could like, let's pretend you got transported to the fictional world of Dune and you're saying like, why don't you tell everyone what to do with the thing?
Right.
And they're like,
that's my question. Why aren't they
like,
using the voice all the time? Why do they ever have anything to be afraid of?
I'm saying I think the characters would be like, what? We don't know. We use it when we feel we should, because they're not.
It's a little like in a horror movie when you have some mystery to, like, the Cenobites. Like, what are they? Why are they here? I don't know what they are. And I think because these particular characters represent a mysterious kind of sect or coven or whatever, I think there's a certain, like, oh, they do weird things and we don't understand them, and we won't totally understand them.
There's a 60s niche to it. For sure.
All right, I'll just go with it.
No, I don't think you have to go with it or have to say you like it, but I don't necessarily like it myself. I'm just saying, like, I'm trying to understand why other people, like your nephews and other people who are my age, have said this is a masterpiece, why they're fine with that. Why they're just like, okay. Well,
I think in a weird sort of way, like, if we look back at Star Wars, like, this guy can choke people. Why can't Obi-Wan choke people? Or why can't, you know what I mean? There's certain aspects to it that it's like, this bad guy can do creepy stuff that we don't quite
But
understand.
like
You know?
I mean, I'll just fight back and say Vader always is in control, and there's never a reason for him to use it until he's trying to maintain control, and then he does.
Yeah,
Whereas
I
like the
think
Bene Gesserits are painted as these figures who are worried about not being in control, and like they feel like they have to hide their plans. And I'm like, there's no reason they would ever not be in control, because they can get anyone they want to do whatever they want at their will at any time. So for me, I don't understand why they need an emperor. Like, they are more powerful with ease than the emperor. So it's weird.
it's
Yeah.
definitely odd. Also, you moved on before I could say it, but the one thing that confuses me that I was watching some of the videos you were watching, Jimmy, and they didn't answer it for me. But like the part of the movie where, sorry, they're like, "Hey, you're the mom of the Isan El Ghaib. That means that you're now the new mother, Bene Gesserit." And I was like, and but okay, fine. But then I was like, with the prophecies they have, the Bene Gesserits know that they faked the the prophecy about Atreides, right? So her being his mother means nothing to them, right? Because they know they faked that. So why is the automatic mother of the Isan Al Ghalib the new mother witch? Do you understand what I'm saying? If that's a fake prophecy they manufactured, how come they're like, okay, and now she gets all the power? What am I missing? What connection am I missing with those two prophecies?
And the only thing I can think of is that like they actually like
Is that
she's
part of
basically
yeah.
like she's been a Bene Gesserit. Yeah, Benny G. She's been a Benny G, and they're
Yeah.
like, well, you should just be now the.
But they say it's because she is the mother
I know.
of the Maudib or whatever, the Maudib or whatever. She is the mother of Paul Atreides, thus she must become this. And I was like, but the his thing is fake, and you made it up. So why is that a thing? Why
See
is
what I mean about the
right?
problem that happens when you cram multiple
Sure.
prophecies
That's
into
got
a
to be explained in the
story?
books, though, right? It has to be.
Gets confusing in a movie.
Yeah, and I think the way I was kind of like, I don't think the people on the ground in Arrakis are exactly the same as the cabal up in space. Like yes, they're
Okay.
part of the religion. It'd be like Christians, but the Pope and the gang set this Messiah thing up, and then maybe their priests just believe
Okay.
it. You know, that's kind of how I viewed it.
I think that's a good parallel.
That's fine.
Jamie.
That's fine. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I kind of making that up.
It also no, but it also speaks to Jimmy. You had a problem with how come the Bene Gesserits don't recognize that is Paul Atreides' mom.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna bring it up, but like, and then
that's kind of what Jamie's saying here is they're so separated, the uppers and the lowers on the ground.
Yeah, because
that's how they didn't realize that they gave all this power to somebody from House.
But then
Atreides,
my question,
right?
okay, then my pushback to that is, but we've seen that they're fucking psychic, and we don't know the limitations of that psychic power.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why don't they just know that Jessica has taken the role and that Paul is still alive? Like, why?
Because everyone's breathing spice and drinking piss, and they're all fucking high. That's
all I needed to hear was, we can't see, it's too clouded. I just needed Yoda to be like, too clouded there is, like, much mystery and future there is, you know, like,
we're just watching people overdose on this drug that's all over the planet constantly. That's why nothing makes sense.
So anyway, I'll put that to a close. But like, you know, when you're writing a fantasy screenplay, or it's sci-fi epic, or something that you want to show this gigantic cool world, try to keep the geographical window small. Try to keep it to 2 warring factions, even if there's all these great houses. Just focus on 2. Try to keep that cast window to like 10 with some, you know, ancillary people. Try to keep that mythology window small. Just give us 1 prophecy, please. Just 1, please. Try to keep the magic window small. Can you just give us 1 magic system? Because this movie gives us 1 magic system, and we're sitting here trying to explain still how it works after spending 6 hours watching it. Really 9 hours if you count the first movie. So yeah, that's all.
No, it's good. I'm sure anyone that's a huge Dune fan will loathe this episode.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I just want to
sorry.
apologize.
I'm laughing still, but I am sorry.
Yeah, I'm sure these questions are very well answered in a book I haven't read in like over 25 years.
Yeah, or a great explainer video that I shouldn't need to go to understand after watching the movie twice.
This is like the only time I was like, we really should have a Dune expert on with us just to explain this stuff.
But annotate the movie for us.
But I would argue, Jamie, that would go against also talking about the movie. You know what I mean? A little bit.
Yeah.
Like this movie should work for people without that.
No,
right?
I totally agree that goes against what we're doing, but we're delving into that aspect just by nature. So I feel like it would quickly sum up with somebody saying, "Oh, that's explained in the book," and we could just move on. Because they would know. They'd be like, I know what it is. And
they could answer the prophecy question.
Yeah.
Again,
exactly.
I'm just trying to come at it from like what not to learn from this.
Right.
Replicate in your own spec script that's an epic sci-fi or epic fantasy.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. I want you to get the recommend from the reader.
Yeah.
That's all. Yeah.
Well, we did TV shows, so protagonist imbalance. I feel like those quotes I read earlier might come into play a little bit.
This is mine, and after 119 episodes, we have never talked about this. I'm very excited to bring up one of the most common issues I see in scripts. So, okay, Jamie, I'd love to hear if you've experienced this too. So chime in whenever. So like one of the most common things I see when I'm given a script is I'll get a feature script or even a pilot, right? Like a 60-minute or a 45 pager. And the writer knows who the hero is. And they've created this arc plot storyline with your traditional story DNA. They got a goal. Everything's great in the construction. They got a great why here, why now. Everything's working. And then the hero disappears for like 20 or 30 pages. Then it just like spider webs into this movie about this other character that like is just like a supporting character in their life. And like we don't get any updates or mention of the hero or anything. And then 30 pages later, the hero's back, and then it's about the hero again. And then the movie plays out like a normal movie again. And I call this protagonist imbalance. And that is because we like lose sight of your hero. And then there's a version of this. Well, I'll go into the other part. And then there's a version of this that isn't just heroes. So I just want to say, like, proceed with caution when you're cutting to other characters for long periods of time, because like, so you have this character that has a rooting resume that you've established. They have things that need fixing in their world that we've established. They have goals. They're seeking rewards, stakes, obstacles, relationships. They have their own things that need fixing. And then they just go away for 30 pages. It's the longer that we are disconnected and apart from all of those things that we need updates and to progress about to feel how the situation's going for your hero, the less we can remember even what the fuck we were supposed to care about. Right? The less we remember those things that need fixing, the less we remember the goal they're after, the less we remember what the reward is, the less we remember what that deadline is, the rest we remember about the relationships. It's just the longer we're apart from your hero, the less emotional connection we have with them. And I always use the phrase in my notes, absence makes the audience heart go elsewhere. And so Dune does this. Like at 67 minutes, we leave Arrakis and we leave Paul and we go to Harkonnen. So, like Bob, you said, now it's the
Fade Roth episode.
Fade Roth, episode. And that episode, without ever coming back to Paul, lasts 26 minutes. We go almost a half an hour without seeing Paul in an arch plot, supposedly Hollywood movie, right? It's very... And so that's why it's like, you come back to Paul and you're like, wait, what was he after again? Like, oh, he wants you barely remember the vengeance. You barely remember where he is on this track of becoming the Muad'Dib or the Liza, the prophesized one. You barely remember where he is on the progress of his messianic path, right? And that's because of the protagonist imbalance. All of a sudden, Fade becomes the protagonist for almost a half an hour, and so I would just say, and the same thing happens with supporting characters, right? Like often I'll read a script where like a character is like basically your Stilgar, right? Of this movie, for instance. And I'll read a script where Stilgar is like really important for the first 30 pages of the script. And then Stilgar disappears. And then Stilgar shows up in the last scene and he's like, you did it, and you're like, oh, like, who's that guy again? Like, what, why, how was he important to our hero? And then I go, it's like your support. It's the same problem, right? We need to be reconnected with them at some point, and they need to find a way to organically add them in back to the storyline. So anyway, it was just something I want to bring up.
Morpheus wasn't the one they kidnapped in the Matrix.
Right.
It was about somebody else. And at the end of the Matrix, Morpheus was like, you did it.
Yeah, well, yeah. Imagine if
right?
Morpheus we had that whole first act.
Right.
With Morpheus calling him and telling him how to get here. And then he does like the desert of the real sequence. And then Morpheus just disappears for the rest of the movie. He didn't die. Nothing bad happened to him. He's just gone. And then the last scene, he's there and he's like, I told you were the one, like it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
So you have to be mindful of these things, even with important supporting characters. And I use the 10% rule, which is like, it's 10 pages, but like I try to just say 10%. In this case, Paul disappears for 17% of the story, so it's a little long.
I know I get that a lot when I am doing screenwriting consultations. I have a lot of notes that say I haven't seen Paul in 20 pages, and I'll count them. I haven't seen this in 25 pages, and it's usually eye-opening to them. They're like, oh yeah, I guess I do need that. And one of the interesting things, like in my world, that if you're kind of at the advanced stages, like you have an agent, and you're trying to sell things and stuff like that, writing a part that an actor wants to play is so important. Like it becomes, after you get all this other stuff down, that almost becomes one of the biggest things to do. It's like, well, concept and originality and budget and all that stuff, but writing a part for an actor is really important. And if you have a script where you could care less about the character so much that they can vanish for 30 pages, that's like red flag number one. If an actor, unless the actor wants to like explore Bermuda or wherever you're shooting it or something, and they're like, oh, good, I'm only in this like 20 pages and they're paying me. But yeah, it's really important to. That's one of those easy red flags to see. If your character is vanishing for long periods of time. I mean, I think even more than 5 or 6 pages. If your main character,
I think 5 is preferred, but like at worst 10.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. So, every now and then you get a weird scene that has to be 7 pages or 8 pages or something, but it should be very rare, like once every 10 scripts you write or something like that. But yeah, if you're over 5 with the main character going missing, I think it should be a flag. You should say, why do I need this? What's happening here? That should definitely
also
come up.
I'd argue in this specific case, Jimmy, you said 26 minutes or 27 minutes?
26 minutes, yeah.
In this specific case, and I'm not dogging on Frank Herbert again, Fade Rotha is so much more interesting than our protagonist in so many ways. It's ridiculous. Like that Fade Rotha sequence in a movie that I did not want to watch is a breath of fresh air. It's like that's like the best sequence in the movie for me. He's just so much more captivating to watch and be with, and he's got like ironclad goals of what he wants and everything. It's like completely different from Paul Atreides.
I actually think I actually think that's a interesting trigger. Like, you have a TV show when all these other things in the world are more interesting than hanging with your main character. That's usually a good trigger. Yeah,
it's not on our talking points, but that is a little bit of a problem here. And I
Yeah.
don't know if it's
Yep.
the writing or if it's the performance. Nothing against Timmy C.
Timmy C.
Yeah, but like he's not that captivating. And then you cut to Fade Rotha for half an hour, and it's like, yeah, like, can I watch this movie? Can I watch the Fade Rotha movie, please? You know, it's kind of I would prefer that to some degree.
I
So,
bet Fade has a great reverse rooting resume.
totally. I mean,
That is
he's
awesome.
murdering women the second we
Yeah.
meet him. So, yeah, it's pretty
Ugh.
anti-rooting, right? But
Ugh.
it's captivating to watch because
Yes.
he's so
Scary.
villainous and scary and crazy looking, and but cutting away from the least interesting guy that doesn't really know what's going on or who he is to, warrior war boy. It's like, okay. I think that's everything on our talking points,
Yeah.
isn't it? We did it.
Yeah.
Oh,
did
thank God.
We made it through the desert.
Yeah, we did it.
I
Is there
I have one last thing to mention.
Go for it.
When I was Googling, I came across a couple Frank Herbert quotes, and I just found them interesting. They really don't relate to Dune specifically or this movie. The first one he said is just obvious, but these two resonated with me. They're like things I've said, so that's why when I saw them, I was like, "Oh, these are cool." Money to a writer is time to write. I believe that's true. Every time I get paid, it's more like I can extend this ridiculous passion that I have. It's less like I'm rich. But yeah, that's one thing. Interestingly enough, apparently his wife was the breadwinner when he wrote Dune.
Okay.
In the family,
Okay.
she worked for an advertising company, and he worked on Dune for like 6 years or something like that. I know he researched it for 6 years before he started to write it, which is just kind of wild.
Oh, wow.
And then the second one, this is something I say a lot, and again, this is more the process of writing. But later, coming back and reading what I have produced, I am unable to detect the difference between what came easily and when I had to sit down and say, well, now it's writing time, and now I'll write. And this is something I've said a lot because, and different people have different takes on this, but some people are like, if you're not in the zone, don't worry about it. What I found is if I sit down and say, just write a shitty 6 pages, a month from now, I can barely tell the shitty 6 pages from the times I was like, man, I'm doing it. I'm the best. Nothing can stop me. I'm in the zone. And that's kind of what he's saying here is like the difference between the times he just forced himself to sit down and write some shitty pages and the times he was really in the zone. He can't really tell the difference like a month later. It feels different when you're doing it, but then a month later, it's not so different.
Yeah.
So it's something I've said to a lot of people.
I like that.
Yeah, it's really cool. Good.
Yep. So anyway,
so is your advice building off that, Jamie, to just write?
Yeah, when you're not feeling it, if you can get yourself to write anyway, just go write, even when you're not feeling it. Now, some people just don't know how to do that or something, but I actually think it's very valuable if you can force yourself to write 6 shitty pages. I think
that's a good lesson for all creativity.
Yeah.
When you don't want to do it, give yourself a deadline.
And you'd be surprised how often it's not so bad. It's not so bad. I know I did like the NaNoWriMo and stuff like that. And you write a novel in a month. And a lot of times I sat down and I was like, I do not feel like writing this today. And I would just I'd start at it. And I can't say I ever got in the zone. It would just be like miserable the whole time. But at the end of the day, it wasn't that bad. I think there's some things that might have been a little clunky or something, and then other times you figure a problem out because you almost just brute force your way through it. But a lot of times it was just like, I don't feel like writing this scene. It's like some boring scene that I don't want to write. And I just did it, and then it was fine. It was fine when I came out the other end. So anyway, that's a quote from Frank. Something I tell people a lot. Yeah. So.
Yep. I started with quotes from Frank. You ended it with quotes from Frank. So
Perfect.
At least we gave him his due.
That's right. That's right.
It's not like he directed this movie, but did you guys have anything you wanted to, plug, add, anything else?
I just wanted to encourage, if you have any questions, comments, if you hated this episode and you want us to know, send them to writersblockbusterspodcast@gmail.com. We got I think we need maybe one more, and we'll have enough for our questions episode that we want to do, which is awesome. I think I've said this before, though. We just keep getting questions from the same 5 people, and I would like, to have more than 5 people involved in the answering the questions, more than the same 5 people that we've answered questions before on this show. So
though for those 5 people, feel free to keep sending. But
thank you. we try.
We love your questions.
Yeah, they might have some good ones left in them. Jamie, do you have anything?
Nope, nothing.
Okay. In that case, thanks everybody for listening, and save your spice. See everybody later.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Hey, this is Bob Rose, and thank you for listening to Writers Blockbusters. If you'd like to financially support the show, please consider joining my Patreon. I've been producing the podcast for several years completely out of pocket, and I'd like to keep producing it ad-free and no longer at a loss. If you'd like to help, head on over to patreon.com/Bob Rose Sucks. That's right, Bob Rose Sucks. And if you want the one and only Jimmy George to help polish up that writing project you're kind of struggling with, head on over to scriptbutcher.com. As a listener, you already know he's the best there is, scriptbutcher.com. You can also support the show by simply sharing it or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate both. Thank you for listening, and see you next episode.